Brazil owes modernism to two women artists that shifted the aesthetics of the time, Anita Malfatti and Tarsila Amaral. Although she was born with enormous privilege and wealth, that didn't prevent her from becoming incredibly revolutionary herself. She divorced her first husband when she was only 27 years old and pursued a successful career as an artist like very few women were able to do at the time. She was one of the first persons who successfully answered the question, what does it mean to paint like a Brazilian artist? And for that reason, the famous writer Haroldo de Campos wrote that if you would make a structural history of Brazilian painting, without a doubt, Tarsila do Amaral would play a leading and pioneering role, a foundational role. Abaporu, one of Tarsila's most famous paintings, was given to Oswald de Andrade as a birthday present in 1928. By that time, the couple was spending a significant time in Paris, and Tarsila was becoming quite renowned and thriving within the Parisian art circle after the success of her first solo show in 1926. When Amaral painted it in 1927, she was still developing her face pau Brasil, concentrated on exploring what it meant to paint as a Brazilian artist. Years later, discussing this work with her friend Sofia Cabersasi Villalba, she recollected that the picture was a result of several images that had been etched in her unconscious from stories she heard as a child. The haunted house, and the voice that shouts, I'm falling, a creature that lets their foot fall down, a foot that looked enormous in her mind, and falling, and then the other foot would fall, following the hand and the entire body. She remembered as well the disproportions in the previous paintings of Negra, whose elongated breasts and small head preceded Abaporu. All these images lingered in the artist's head for years until 1927 when she started to paint it. In this picture, we see a human-like creature sitting alone on a small mound of earth that lifts the subject from a ground we cannot see. Our attention is taken by the enormous large foot that dominates most of the lower part of the frame, which is disproportionately large compared to the minute head of the creature. Our eyes are absorbed by the foot as if we are constantly taken there by a curvature formed by an abstracted sun in the middle of the composition and the creature's body. Its head rests on its left hand, which looks minuscule compared to the right hand on the ground, which is 20 times bigger. This disproportion makes us wonder whether the proportions of this creature's body are the ones we are seeing, or if it's a distortion produced by the angle at which we are looking at it. However, somehow the enormous sun that appears in the background, which is probably 10 times larger than the head, makes us feel as if its entire body was being pulled to the sky but unable to move due to the weight of the creature's foot. As if gravity was significantly different the more you ascended to the atmosphere. Yet, our entire perception changes when we observe the abstracted cactus in the background, on the form and almost as high as the creature, despite being very far back. This makes the viewer wonder whether this elongation is something that this creature is experiencing alone, or if, perhaps, its body is just like that, which reminds us of a prehistoric, almost Jurassic time, when animals had enormous bodies that were significantly larger than their heads. Whatever it may be, whether the creature was created like that or was deformed by the weight of the earth, Amaral manages to make the viewer somehow agree with the proportions and see the value of the enlarged feet. In the 1920s, both the intellectual and the artistic worlds criticized the dominance of rational thought. Modernity's blind confidence in rationality had led them astray towards one of the most horrible wars they had ever lived through. Artists were looking to reconnect with nature, to the unconscious that was no longer tied to the rational mind, to free humanity from the burden of what they experienced a few years back. Yet neither surrealism modernism nor Dada had managed to create a real connection to the ancestral mind, to make the mystical and the magical a reality. Neither had succeeded in turning the world on its head and started a real cultural revolution. Amaral was approaching the answer, one that did not have to reconnect to a past that was foreign to them, as most European artists experience, but that lay within her own history and cultural miscegenation. When Oswald de Andrade saw this painting, he was immediately drawn to it and called his friend the poet Raoul Pop. After staring at the picture for a while, they decided this was the image they were looking for, one that represented the new intellectual movement they had been craving to create. Using a Tupi-Guarani dictionary, they named the creature Abaporu, which means the man who eats man. De Andrade wrote a manifesto around it, one that explored the cannibalistic practices of the Tupi-Guarani communities back in Brazil to motivate a new cultural uprising that would allow Brazilian artists to devour European modernism. Tupi-Guaranis would only eat individuals that were more powerful than them to absorb their power. It was a gesture that required the entire body to digest the other. Therefore, the proposed revolution was not a mere process of intellectual appropriation. In fact, it was not meant to be intellectual at all. It required the entire body to absorb, digest, transform, dismiss, and to create something entirely new. As we can see in Tarsila's painting, it was not a process of the mind. Rationality was removed from its high platform to reconnect with the basic structure of ourselves and rewire our identity to the land, to the soil, and our own maternal roots. This painting alone was not the sole basis of this movement. As Tarsila mentioned in one of her letters, the picture a Negra, whose naked body, elongated breast, and exhausted face reflected on the mother as a figure of the enslaved, unvalued past. This image would inform Oswald de Andrade to place the identity of Brazil in the Pindorama matriarchy and make colonial patriarchal values responsible for disconnecting us from nature and communal life. He writes in his manifesto, "Down with the dress oppressive social reality registered by Freud, reality without complexes, madness, prostitution, or penitentiaries of the Pindorama matriarchy." Armed by this series of paintings and their manifesto, Andrade and Amaral distanced themselves from the European avant-gardes, surrealism, cubism, and dadaism, that used to proclaim themselves as the answer for a cultural transformation. According to the Brazilian intellectuals, the solution was not to be placed beyond the limits of reality, in our unconscious or in an unreachable metaphysical space of geometric abstraction. It did not lie solely in the reconnection with their autochthonous self, their native or African legacies, nor in the absolute dismissal of their European inheritance. On the contrary, it implied a bodily absorption of both legacies to achieve a total transformation. A renovation that would not occur in our minds but in our stomachs, so every bit of their essence would be part of this new identity. This shift also permitted the recognition that Europe would have never achieved their goals without its colonies in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We won the Caraib Revolution, greater than the French Revolution, the unification of all productive revolts for the progress of humanity. Without us, Europe would not have its meager declaration of the rights of man.